Foundation and the India International Center. We welcome you this evening to the 61st session of Art Matters. We have been running it as you can see, for almost 6 years. This features conversations, discussions, talks, presentations, etc., with a wide range of arts and ideas and artists. Currently, February being the month in which Syed Haider Raza was born, from last year we started celebrating a multi-venue, multi-arts festival called Raza Utsav. It started yesterday, 2 days ago, 7th and 8th of February, the Yuva Shastri at Triveni Kala Sangam, where we presented young performing artists from classical traditions of India, namely music and dance. This talk today falls within the Raza Festival, and I will come presently to introduce you to Catherine David. But before that, let me give you some details. On 10th, in Mandla, where Raza belonged, we are doing on the banks of Narmada a concert of Kabir music, which is again an annual phenomena where we do something or the other in the month of February. We will also be doing, there is a show specially curated by Rameshwar Bruta, which will start on 14th of February at the Sridharani Art Galleries, which would, it's called Individual Palettes. Every year we request either a curator or an eminent artist, or both of them if possible, to curate a show largely of younger people. But it can also be of one's own choice. So this is not exactly exclusively younger, most of them are young. So that shall open there. From 15th, 16th, and 17th February, we have the Raza Biennale of Asian Poetry. There are 26 poets from 21 countries coming and reading their poetry here in International Center. We keep on introducing, because Raza was very keen about the young people and promotion of their talent and creativity. We are organizing again on 18th and 19th, Dhrupad and Surbahar, recitals and Kathak and Odissi by young classical performers. These are picked up from all over the country. On 20th, in Gandhi Matters, which is a running series here, which was inaugurated by Dr. Ashish Nandi in October, we'll have Satyagraha and the Conquest of Evil by Professor Vineet Haksar. On 22nd February, which is the birthday of Raza, we'll have the second of Yugma. The first one was last year when Ramkumar and Raza showed together. This year it will be Krishan Khanna and Raza showing together. And we are not going to stop at that. So the last one is being called, although it's a festival of ideas, it's being called Vichar Vinod. And it will have about 25 young historians, anthropologists, social scientists, and environmentalists and such others to talk on what is the question. We have not posed any question. We are asking them to decide what is the question and let us know what is the question. So that's a long spread. Now, Catherine David is a well-known figure in the international world of arts. She has created sensation, I'm told, when she did an edition of Documenta, which is a very celebrated and a very path-breaking, innovative art event. She has a She has studied Spanish and Portuguese literature, linguistics and art history in Sorbonne, and then she has been a curator at the National Museum of Modern Art, Centre Pompidou. From 1990 to 94, she moved to National Gallery of Judith Palm, also in Paris, and she has, to her credit, a large number of specially curated shows where she has shown the rigor and the range of her vision and the quality of her curation and insight which goes into it. Now, this is a long thing, so I much better cut it short and let you hear her, herself. In 2014, she curated Unedited History, Iran, 1960-2014, at the Musée des Modernes de la Ville Paris, and now she has returned as the deputy director to Pompidou. And she has been visiting us, and we are grateful to her that she accepted to talk this evening. So there you are, Catherine David.
Great new interpretations to Indian people who know better than me what happened in the 20th century. First of all, I would like to thank very much the Rada Foundation for the generosity of the invitation, for the seriousness of the project. So keeping working, keeping introducing people, making many complicated organizations possible. And of course, I'm very happy to have you tonight and to have already a long time old colleague and friend, Mrs. Gita Kapoor, whom I met in Documental when we had a quite strong debate. Maybe it will happen. It will happen again tonight. So you could say maybe after what Ashok said that modernism is maybe something like what is the question, because it's indeed a very wide theme, and I would like to precise a little bit. I have to say that we really decided for the talk very fast, and the only thing which was clear is that I won't speak.
No, keep on.
I won't speak about Mughal miniature. That's of course clear. There is, tonight it's okay because there is not even screen, so I thought I would be in another room, and I was prepared to tell you no images, not as a provocation, but also because I'm not the decent time for organizing a very meaningful corpus, and also because it will be, I would say, the same in Paris. People are more and more interested in looking at images on screens when they have so amazing real works in exhibitions, and only in Delhi. You have at the moment good hanging in NGMA, Drisha Kala at the Red Fort, Bengal Masters Kiran Nadar, Beno de Behari Mukherjee at Vadera Gallery. So I think you have many real works, some of which I might speak about tonight. So first precision of, I will precise the frame of the talk. I'm not here to define, redefine, even less to explain to an Indian audience, an Indian amateur, what is or what was Indian modern art. I think that Indian modern art, as any modern in the world, is maybe better defined as modern art in India, which would be more inclusive of very different practices and influences. And we should begin saying that modern is one thing, modernism is another one. In France, when we are a little bit tired of these debates, we are used to say modern is what happened. It's a series of social changes, industrial organization, changes between the ratio of people living in the countryside and people living in the cities, and so on and so forth. And modernism is more what people wanted, whether they succeeded or not. So modernism is really a wish. It's a project very often an emancipatory project, and modern is what happened to a certain extent. Till the point that I was reading recently a very interesting article on Iraqi modern architecture, and the conclusion of the article was in Iraq we had modernism without modernity, which is, I think, a very adequate comment on what happened to the culture, the very rich culture in this very sad country. So I'm afraid I will have to decide for one mic because we'll have. So I will try to speak a little bit between my eyes, which are damaged by pollution and seeing too many works, and my voice, which is not so good. I hope we'll manage. So of course tonight I would like to have more of an open discussion on points of view, methodology, eventually proposals for a better visibility and understanding of the major modern corpus, both in India and outside India. Modern art in India is and has been. So I'm trying to figure out how this very major, again, corpus of works could be better understood, better shown, and better shared by more people. And of course, when you would deal with this question, you would be like inviting people to enlarge, and people meaning, of course, the theoretician, the art historian, the critics, but also the public, inviting people to enlarge and complexify what we have now to deal with, which is a global, or I don't like too much this word global, the world corpus of modern art, wherever it's coming from. Again, I would like to precise that my knowledge of Indian modern art is really through seeing collections, whether they were or they are public or private collections in India. And I think it's very important to underline these days where it's quite often anticipated that you will, by definition, know modern Indian art as you know modern American art, or as you know modern Italian art. And this is like supposing that the universalism of Western modern art collections is absolutely guaranteed, when we know that most of the non-Euro-American Western collections are mainly including Euro-American artists, with a few specific exceptions being non-Euro-American artists who have been working, living, sometimes dying in these supposed to be main centers. It can be through very specific connections or very specific participations to artistic groups, and we should really not underestimate the very transnational and transcultural efficiency of a certain number of artistic avant-garde groups which were active in many different cities, and not only the supposed to be centers of the modern. But it's also clear that, and it's something which is not very clear for some of my colleagues, that if you want to deal with modern Indian art, you have to look at works in India, because you don't have any major corpus accessible outside from India. I would say the same of China, if you really want to deal with, I'm not speaking about ancient times, because you might have exceptional collections in Metropolitan, British Louvre, etc. Louvre, no, better for Chinese art. But it's absolutely clear when you want to deal with a modern corpus, you have no other possibility than to be in situ and to deal with the works in the proper countries. In that case, of course, we're speaking about countries which are also continents, so meaning with even more complexity, you have transcultural, translocal dynamics, and of course it takes a lot of time when you want to figure out what happened. And when you would work this way, so trying to constantly enlarge and complexify the supposed to be enlarged globally. Again, I don't like the word, and I don't like the fantasy of exhaustivity. You are never exhaustive. Each time I'm traveling seriously, meaning with time, meeting with people, looking at collection, I discover minimum one absolutely amazing artist I never heard about before. So I think we have to be very modest and not believing we will be exhaustive, but at least trying to be serious and trying to be more and more inclusive and more complexifying the world corpus of the modern. Also, in a way, and here I will mention an Indian author, trying to put an end to what Patamitter called the syndrome of the failed Picasso, meaning any artist, modern, should be looked at, evaluated, estimated according to the way he answered well or not well to a Picasso, and you could enlarge to a few other masters or a few other supposed to be specific styles. And of course, this failed Picasso syndrome is still very active. Even so, when people are intelligent, of course, they will never accept they are victim of the Picasso syndrome. They would better tell you, oh, it's very bizarre, or it's too late. We did that before, and you never know who is the we. And it's reminding me when I organized in Paris at the Galerie des Jeux de Paume, so it was 91 or 92, I don't remember, the first retrospective after he passed away of Helio Oiticica, the Brazilian artist, and many people came to us when they would look at the wonderful materialist monochrome he did in the mid-60s. Oh, it's very, very beautiful, it's very interesting, but we did that in the 20s and in the 30s. So of course, not paying attention at all to the, and in case of Oiticica, it would be like another talk, but just mentioning, in case of Oiticica, of course, there is a complete reinvention of the Mondrian paradigm in the context of the society, of the culture, of the political context of the Brazil, of the dictatorship, so the mid-60s up to the mid-70s, which is, of course, a very different story than the 20s and 30s. Plus, when you would look very carefully, I doubt you can make a confusion between a work by Helio Oiticica and a work by a Swiss concretist. It doesn't look the same. I think that when we are to this, when we are here, we should also be aware, and it's something I don't really see often when I'm trying to discuss with people dealing with Indian modern art, that Indian modern art, as any modern art, is really part of a connected modernity. And you know, connected modernity is not a very exotic notion for Indian people. As you know, one of your great intellectual is the master of connected histories, Mr. Subramanian, and it's quite clear that India didn't escape to a connected modernity very early. And when you would enter in this endless discussion, and I hope it won't be the one tonight because it's very boring at the end, when what is modern, when did it begin? I would say that from my perspective, and reading many very interesting texts, many of them Indian, by the way, on the, not even the beginning, the invention of Calcutta, the reason why Calcutta was invented and planned and designed, and of course after the people in it and the culture and the cultural development of Calcutta, and after what would become the Bengal School and Bengal Cultural Project, I would say, because when you say Bengal School, many people stick to the artworks, but it's also a Bengali cultural project, and with this very, very interesting point. I don't know if it's fully specific, because you know, when the more you work, the more you find parallels and similarities in different geocultural species. But when it comes to Bengal, what is at first extremely intriguing and specific is this kind of, from the beginning, very, very close intrication of the emancipatory project, for not saying the political project a little bit later, the spiritual project, and the aesthetical project. And it's not, I think, a pure coincidence when many of the people involved in the beginning in this global, we could say, cultural project, including, of course, Tagore, but including Vivekananda, including Kusmarwani, and many other ones. It's both emancipatory and political, spiritual and aesthetical. And I think it's really something which is very important to be looked at. I'm sure we could find some parallel development in other geocultural context than India, but it seems to me very, very specific, this kind of very precise and strong intrication of the different projects. When we would, of course, speak in terms of this connected modernity, it has also to do with a situation where artists are not developing into a kind of autistic closed space, but interacting with many other ones, many images coming from other places, from outside, but also many different images and works and references coming from the proper country, continent. And in case of India, I was yesterday visiting the exhibition at the Red Fort, and it was absolutely amazing to see, especially the portraits room, to see at the same time, so would it be 1890, would it be 1930, completely heterogeneous representational systems used by different artists. So of course, somebody much more knowledgeable than me would probably enter in a more deeper and precise discussion, understanding what was an anonymous painter at the time, and especially 1890, what was the kind of commission, who was commissioning the works and for what. But just in this room, you could really understand this extremely complex interconnectivity with a kind of outside from India, but also this interconnectivity with many different memories, references, images coming from India. Different cultural practices, different cultural origins of the images which were circulating. So I think that we have to be very aware that Indian modern art, as any modern art, is transnational. I would prefer to say, first of all, trans-regional, and after we say transnational because nation came, and these days we have many, many newcomers, but first trans-regional and after transnational. And I think that when you are dealing with modernity, for instance, in the case of India, we have to keep in mind, and you know much better than me, that at the time India was also Bangladesh, Pakistan, and you can't avoid, you have to remember this cultural entity. And I think it makes sense when you are looking at many works. So trans-regional and transnational, transcultural, and translocal modernity, because especially in the case of India, you had so many different localities that this kind of exchange between very different practices is probably more significant than what happened in France, for instance. And going deeper into I'm a beginner, my knowledge of Indian modern art, I mean, I would question, what it means in such a big country and in such a complex modern art situation to discuss very different artist positions and figures. As I'm taking really at random, it could be Raza living in Paris, but keeping a very strong, very intimate connection with his peer in India, and not on a daily basis because the internet wasn't there yet. But when you think about the time, very, very connected and very regular writing and receiving letters. No, it was really it was another time, but a very intimate connection with his Indian peers. So this kind of figure, but is not fully contemporary. But how do we manage with other figures, other kind of practices, other kind of commitment? Maybe it's a generation a little bit before. Artists like Nandalal Bose artists like Ramin Kaurbai, or artists like Binodé Bari Mukherjee, who were really not moving a lot. Mukherjee went to Nepal, but it's not what I would call a cosmopolitan life. It has nothing to compare with Tagore, for instance, Rabindranath. But nevertheless, no, it could be very important to consider and trying to understand what it meant in the development of Indian modernity, this kind of artists who had, in a way, first a commitment to the project before the commitment to their own realization to a certain extent. So this is something probably extremely, maybe not specific just to India, but one modern position which I think should be thought about. I was really trying to figure out, and yesterday, especially before yesterday, when we visited the Binodé Bari Mukherjee exhibition, you know, it's very moving to a certain extent, because you see it's so modest. You know, you have these many drawings looking like exercise, experiment, trying to deal with the relationship you have, you think you have, with a certain kind of Japanese expression. It's a very nothing to do, you know, with artists who would work for having the next exhibition. And in his case, it's close to, I don't think you have so many artists who were absolutely, so difficult to say who failed, but artists who, I mean, it's not the failed Picasso artists who failed or disappeared. It's truly not the case of Binodé Bari Mukherjee, but it's very interesting to consider in the modern moment an artist who had so few exhibitions. And in a way, when you think about his international or larger projection, all you have when you are not coming to India are the images, and mainly the images of the Shantiniketan murals, which are absolutely amazing, by the way. So I think this should be considered. Should be, and you know, I was thinking also about that when I was discussing recently with a young Chinese colleague working in Singapore, Yin Ke, and Yin is working on a lot on Bagi Ongso, the artist from Myanmar, who is absolutely a contemporary of K.G. Subramanian, and she was. It's her statement. And she was telling me, till a certain extent, Bagi Ongso has been more faithful to the enseignement, to the teaching, or to the rules given by, even if rule is not, maybe not the good word, you know, my English is what it is, so what, let's say, the rules given by Nandalal Botha, and in a way, Bagi Ongso was more faithful in a way that he didn't pay much attention to his immediate visibility. Most of his work circulated through magazines, reviews, papers he would give to friends and colleagues, and but being very demanding in terms of what is the aesthetical act. How do you work? In case of Bagi Ongso, it makes us smile today, but for instance, he was very famous for drinking a lot, and he would never, ever begin a serious drawing or work when he was drunk, and he was telling his friend, no, it's not for art, no, let's enjoy, but I will surely not work in this shape. So, meaning that this position of the artist, what it meant to stay in your own circumstances, and to be at the same time a very important modern artist, is also a question for today, because we could say, it's maybe a little bit down to the earth, but no, we could say Ramkin Kaurbai is absolutely amazing as a modern sculpture, and absolutely unknown, or not known enough, or known for a very reduced body of works, which are at the best, when you are taking the good books, the the outside large sculptures he did in Shantiniketan, and at the worst only the Santal family. But Ramkin Karbhai is also a sculptor who worked a lot on more domestic size and small and middle size. And when you look at these works, it's absolutely clear. And I'm not saying that he borrowed or even if he copied. I'm saying I want to be very precise. If not, I would be completely in contradiction with what I said previously. It's absolutely clear that he was in a dialogue with sculptors like Epstein, eventually Gaudier Brechka, and it's absolutely clear that most of these images were circulating through the documentation Tagore was taking with him. And we know that in London you had a very strong group of writers, art historians and artists who were very keen and very familiar with a certain tradition of Asian art, not only India. Epstein was especially interested in Indian art, but others were interested also in Japanese and Chinese ancient, well, we'll better say ancient, because today it's a little bit polemical when you say classical art in China, so it's better to say ancient than modern. So I think that these questions, I think, could be really developed, because we are in a situation where a certain number of artists are not at all, they are known by the Indian people, but I think the discussion is not what it could be. Another example, and I will end here with this example, an artist I knew, but I have to say very honestly that I had looked, and I had looked, and I saw recently a larger body of works. It's Mira Mukherjee. It's absolutely amazing when you begin to look from very close, when the works are well shown, because when it's small and when it's shown as a flower pot, of course, it's losing. It has to be shown very properly. And what is absolutely amazing, apart from the work of this kind of transportation into a modern form and discussion of very precise tribal motifs, is the fact that it's also due to the technique, but nevertheless it's very meaningful. In the 20th century, you don't have so many examples. One work, one edition. So no, so maybe now you have people doing, we have that in France too, and over casting, but this is close to dishonest and sometimes criminal, because you are destroying the works or the image of the work, and Musée Rodin is doing that. You know, I know a little bit what I'm speaking about, but I'm really speaking about the proper work and the proper project of Mira Mukherjee. It's absolutely important, this idea, and it's not just for economical reasons, you know, it's really a very meaningful. One work, one edition, and bronze. And again, you don't have so many in the sculpture modern tradition, so precise, and till a certain extent, I would say, radical in the practice. Because it also means that a sculpture is not, it's rare that a sculpture has many works, because it's the time of the work, the time of the calf, the time. So, you know, it's really very interesting from an artist to think about the limitation of the work, and in a way, the limitation of the circulation of the work. It's not something you do without thinking, and when you see, I see a short movie on her, when you see this woman, she doesn't look like somebody not knowing what she was doing. Now I would like to come, of course, it's like all coming, it's like there is a thread, and you go on, and of course when you begin to consider this kind of artist, and you have cases again, not only in India, but in India it's a very interesting, and from my point of view, important case, these artists who have a certain kind of commitment to a project. And if you try to think a little bit further, because India, of course, is not the only one in this case, but you have a massive example in India. We are still associating very closely modern art, the practice of modern art, the development of modern art, to a very specific kind of institution which was developed not so early in the States with Catherine Dreyer and the first private public collections, but as really public institutions, government institutions. The Museum of Modern Art is more 30s, 40s, and sometimes much later. The French one, French cave, is not so original because the National Museum of Modern Art, and I'm working in this old institution, which is now in Pompidou Center. National Museum of Modern Art in Paris was created after the war, in the late 40s, so it's not at all something very new, but nevertheless, the development of modern art was really associated to this kind of institution. And when you look, and it seems to be like the rule, because a museum is not only, and when I'm saying Museum of Modern Art, the institution, I'm not referring only to a building, because of course it's very often a building, but a museum was also invented, conceived as a public collection, so with open access to a larger group of people. The museum, as an idea, as a project, was conceived as encouraging and making possible the constitution of an audience, and if possible, the enlargement of this audience, and I'm not sure it was successful very often, and the constitution of, and it's probably the most important, and again not the most successful, the constitution of a polemical space, meaning a space where you look, a space where you comment, a space where you agree or you disagree, and as long as you are not destroying the works, you are very welcome to disagree and to express yourself. So these conditions were supposed to be like the rule and developing everywhere, but when you look at the reality of the development of modern art on a world scale, it's this kind of rule, this kind of supposed to be the way to do is more of an exception. And when you look very carefully to many modern developments in non-Euro-American countries, you will see that the model is more the Greek museion, and the Greek museion being no building, no collection, no archive, just the living meeting of the muses. And of course the muses these days can be very different than the gods from the past. And when you think about Shantiniketan, it's absolutely a museion model, and surely not a museum of modern art. So, I think this is really very important, because again, we should discuss this kind of norm, rule, canon, whatever you want to call it, of the Museum of Modern Art, and we should consider this day the many heterogeneities and the many complexities which were generated by development of practices in situations which were not the Museum of Modern Art. When you look at, you had many people who were not museum and who were able to keep works, to transmit, to protect, to conserve, and from religious community to specific groups of people, to citizens, decision and foundations, etc. So when you would look on a global level to the many developments, you would see that this idea that the only way of encouraging, maintaining, developing a modern art practice is not only the Museum of Modern Art. So these days it's a different situation, because sometimes people are telling me, yes, but you see, you have more and more, but it's today. So today we have to be very careful. When you come to me in China and you tell me, but you have 190 museums of modern art which were built in the last 2 years. Okay, but this is, it's called Museum of Modern Art, but it is more of a kind of cherry on the pastry of real estate development. You know that for any real estate development in China, you put a museum, it's raising a little bit the standing, the standard, the cultural appeal, or I don't know what. Lebanese people are doing the same, and I don't want to blame, but the Chinese, it's so massive, the scale is a little bit different, and maybe the effects might be a little bit more severe. we are not speaking, we're not speaking about that, and it will be also another talk, another chapter, but I think that these days we have to be very careful. Museum became, so it's a word which is completely misused, now people are speaking about a museum without collection. What is a museum without a collection? It's more like a culture center or exhibition gallery or whatever, but it's not a museum. And I would go a little bit further, and I know that it is more polemical. Museums in the past, till the recent past, were supposed to keep, to show, to preserve, to transmit collections with a certain long-term history. Not what you see these days, of course. If you are a very rich Russian plutocrat, you have 50, 60, 100 millions you can buy very fast. It's a collection, but it has nothing to do with the collections we were dealing with in the past, and it's sometimes very difficult to explain that even to our people in Paris or the Minister of Culture. When you're responsible for collection, more than 300,000 works, and bought and put together by 5 generations of curators. I'm not speaking about Musée du Louvre, it's a much more severe case. It's not at all the same, we don't have the same mission, and it's not at all the same situation. So we have to be very, very careful with this kind of mixing of using a word for situations which are absolutely incomparable. So where we are now, of course, when you begin to think about this Museum of Modern Art and the Museum, it's absolutely clear that what could be discussed is the model of how do you do now, when you are inheriting a situation where, even so in India, you have Museum of Modern Art and the National Gallery of Modern Art, which was opened relatively, not late, but in the Nehru times. It's still a young institution, and it doesn't look like it's necessarily answering to a very specific dynamics and a very specific situation of Indian modern art. But it could, it could. If you would ask me in Paris, I have also many things to discuss in my own museum. So where we are now, we could, when we were speaking again about the modernism, it's again, we spoke very fast by email, and I would be more interested in, again, thinking about the modern. I would say that modern Indian art has, of course, a certain number of very, very specific specificities, formal, intentional, etc., but it is part of a modern project. And my point would be more, especially after seeing the exhibition in New York at the Asia Society, the Progressist Group, that if you are not an ideologue, and if you are not a very strict nationalist, and you would say that modern begins much before 47 in India. I would again go in terms of the project, maybe go back to the Calcutta invention, and I would really consider the Bengal masters, the first, including the first generation. And I know that it's very, I don't know if polemical, but it's discussed, and I read and I heard very severe comments on Bengal school, and sometimes blaming the artist for being a little bit like in a good compromise with the British and with the local traditions and forms. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I have to say that I became really convinced when I read, it's also an Indian writer, so it's not my education, Debashish Banerjee, in this brilliant book, which is Abanindranath Tagore, The Alternate Nation, One is showing in a very, very subtle way how the images by Abhinandra Tagore, including, of course, these miniature looking like images, were de facto including spaces, including individuals, including grouping of people. We could end up including situations which were absolutely not inherited from the traditional Mughal and later miniature, but which were more in dialogue or in interaction or in reaction or in critical position, in relation with what he was looking at around his, I'm not even sure at the studio, it would be more like Virginia Woolf, a room for myself, you know, when you see the way it would work, or anyway, around his room, when he was seeing what you call in India the tension and the communal issue. So he was absolutely aware, he was absolutely attentive, and he had a certain way of introducing in his work the situation he was able to look at and analyze. So this is, you know, with when we would be really down to the earth, we could say it's probably what somebody called, and I want to take the correct English and not my broken English, a kind of very reflective individualism, probably, but it's also corresponding to what we always associated to the modern practice, a kind of a self-consciousness of where you are, what's happening, and how you transform, how you translate, how you are producing a form answering to a certain kind of idea or situation. So it's again, I think that it's a one way of being modern. Of course, it has nothing to compare, and I think it would be absolutely unfair and even stupid to compare the situation of the Bengal school with what happened in 47 and the Progressist group. It's a very different moment. It's a very different group of artists. And but maybe the common point is that both Bengal school, the people in between, and the Progressists, what is also maybe not unique, but very specific to Indian modern art, and not so easy to deal with when you are organizing an exhibition, because you can think and you can on a text you can do many things, you can play with photographs, but when you have to deal with Iketnug works on walls, what is extremely complex, and it was quite visible in New York, the extreme heterogeneity of the works. So artists might be very close, they might share a certain common set of preoccupations, references, and it's very rarely ending in a similarity of the forms, and sometimes it's even close to the opposite. You know, you have an extreme, it's more than diversity, it's absolutely heterogeneous. So it's also something extremely interesting, and which is not, it's very difficult to say a school, you know, I will never speak about modern French art, so again, that's why I'm so cautious with Indian modern art. But when you look at French production, let's say between the beginning of century and the late 50s, you have, after you can discuss the terminology, but you have schools, you have styles, you have people you can put together, you have people which are ending boring because it's too much, too close to another one. But you don't have, unless you would pick them, but you don't have this kind of extreme heterogeneity of the works. So I think as we are in this kind of very seminar atmosphere, I mean, I could end here, because I never promised I would give you the solution and an answer to Indian modernist king question, and I think it will be the same with any other modern art I would deal with. Maybe because many years working and looking at works, and it's not I'm less and less, but I'm not so much interested in defining, is this modern, is this modernist, and I think that at the end of the day we are more or less able to define. I'm more and more interested in the works and what's happening in the works, and how we can come to, in the critical act, in the way you are putting works together, in the way you are circulating the works, trying to pay more and more attention to these to the idiosyncrasies, to the not the same of the modern practice, wherever you are. And I think it's worth for Indian modern art, but it would be worth for many other modern art. Beginning, and this would be another chapter, beginning with, if even so, I don't like to oppose so systematically because I think the situation is much more complex than that. But even when you would go back to what we call Euro-American art, because we would, and the more I'm working on non-Euro-American, the more I'm seeing and able to identify very unsaid, very awkward things happening in the development, supposed to be mainstream, highway of modern European art. More and more, I'm seeing more and more disruptions, bizarre things, and non-canonical modern masters. So I think it could be a very temporary, not even conclusion, but ending to this few comments to modern Indian art. And again, I want to underline, because this is very precious, I have really the time and condition for looking at carefully. I don't know if well, but carefully. I'm doing my best with Raza Foundation and a few other very generous and supportive partners in India.
Could you take some questions?
Friends, Catherine David would welcome some comments and questions. Let them be brief, that's all.
Well, basically, first of all, you've got, oh, sorry, do you want to grab that? No, I was just going to say that I'm a computer scientist, and about a couple of years ago, my son in UK,
Put it closer, please.
in UK has acquired an art gallery. So I have to learn about art. So I'm learning. So my first question to you is, if you were curating an exhibition on Indian modern art in Paris or London, which artists, contemporary or ancient, will you include? And maybe 5 such artists if you give. I mean, and the second thing is, what is the contribution do you think artists like Amrita Sehgal made to the development of Indian modern art?
It's not an easy question, because I would say really many, to the point that I had already a few discussions with colleagues, French and non-French, and including Indian colleagues, and it would be probably, when you would do it carefully, an exhibition in a few episodes, because you have many. And second, I think that it should be a kind of a collaboration, because I think it's very important to work with. We have definitely not opposed or too different, but you have readings which are, of course, extremely. This morning I was, for instance, just an example, because it's not, it's coming from examples. I was looking at an exhibition of contemporary artists, and one of the artists, I don't remember the name, I guess from Pakistan, you had like 2 sculptures, one solid and the other one in comfort, and little by little dissolving, not melting, dissolving. And in the process of dissolution, camphor is camphor, you say in English? Camphor, le camphor. Camphor is in the process of dissoluting. It's creating small and very nice crystals on the surface of the glass box which was on top of the dissolving portrait. And of course, you can already build up meaning out of one solid self-portrait, the other one dissolving, and the dissolution is creating beautiful motif, etc. But I visited with an Indian friend, and she told me in India there is also, it's a very specific camphor because it's also what we are using, or Indian people are using in certain kind of rituals and ceremonies. So it's what I call the radical idiosyncrasies. And modern art, even so some people wanted to make us believe it's absolutely, you can translate in any language, especially when it's abstract, it's the same for everybody, it's not. And so this kind of idiosyncrasy, which are sometimes absolutely crucial to certain works, you better work out when you are in dialogue with colleagues. That can be Indian, it could be somebody knowing intimately, I'm not at all asking for a passport, or I'm absolutely careful with national identities, but I mean that it should be in interlocution. And also discussing the reception, because what I was mentioning before, the very, very special case of these artists who have been more attached to an idea, a project, than to their own egoistic development in a way. It's, of course, a kind of positioning in the modern you can find in other cultural, geocultural and political situations. So it's quite important to have a large, if not large, kind of to be in dialogue. And after that, so it has to be a large exhibition. And after maybe the first discussion and eventually conflict would begin with, where do we begin? And I would begin with Bengal, of course. Of course. But after that, so on Amrita, for me it's very clear. She is a major artist, first. After, she is a very, it's also very interesting that she's an Indian artist of mixed origin, Hungarian and Indian, that she was so, she was able to travel, she had the possibility to go to Paris, so she was very involved with this Montparnasse moment. I think that she had also a lot of fun in Montparnasse, which is nice, but when she came back, she worked a lot when you look at the number and the quality of the works. And I think that it's absolutely amazing the way she was able to propose a certain vision of a, I don't know if it's a figure, a subject, or giving images of a moment she was part of. She was not fully part of, because you have also this a certain class issue in the development of certain modern works. But I think she's absolutely part of the, for me, she's an Indian artist, she's very key to the, but Amrita Shergill, she comes on top of a lift when you are with artists, and I won't say women artists because I'm a little bit irritated sometimes with the women artists. She's on top of the lift. So of course she would be in. And she's after Bengal, so a little bit after. Anyway. I'm not if my answer was...
No, the question and the answer can be different. Yes? Anybody else? Dr. Geeti said, please, wait for the mic.
As Geeti said, I'm a writer and on art. So actually I'm just very interested in the fact that you posited some very important things, like when did, you've taken modernism back to different entry points. And I think that's very important. But to me, the most important thing that you raised was about Meera Mukherjee, and that was en passant, in passing. But I just wanted to say that with her specifically, I don't think she ever thought of herself, I knew her a little bit, as a modern artist. Her engagement with work, I think this brings me to the point I'm making, that her work was totally engaged with the material of what she was working with, bronze, and she was not concerned with a movement or being part of a movement. And I think the fact that she went back to the Adivasi, the Bastar image makers, perhaps I'm asking your comment on it. Is it that reason why you take her to the modern? Because of, let's say, Picasso and Braque and the whole question of returning to the primitive? That is my question. I mean, do you think that modernism has anything to do with it?
First, I think it's one point, the discourse of an artist. I don't think either that Ramkin Kabai was very interested in being identified as a modern artist. And I'm not referring just to the movie, the amazing movie himself, filmed by Ritwik Ghatak, which is giving a very special view on what kind of artist he were and the way he wanted to be looked at. In a way, it's not for very different reasons. It reminded me Ganesh Pine identifying himself as a monkey. So this is it's one thing. The discourse of an artist is consciousness of what he's doing and what he's producing, and you could find in the whole history of modern sculpture, and including artists working with bronze casting, artists who were very modern and very attentive to the material they take, and you have to, because you can't. It's a technique. You can't. You have to know what you are doing. You know, it's very demanding at the technique, and it's not that you have people doing it for you. Maybe now certain kind of contemporary art, but not the artists we are speaking about, and that's why I think that the way she transported Adivasi. What's a tradition, indicate the forms, because it's one thing to evoke a tradition, it's another thing to be very attentive and very careful with the forms you are transporting. So she was not doing, it was very, very precise what she was doing. And the fact that she would use the same technique, and again, not only for small sculptures or medium size, but also for the very, very big ones, which is close to unique for such a size. Because Lost Works is very often for smaller objects because it's very precise. So I think that, of course, I think she was absolutely aware of what she was doing. And it's one thing to be extremely, again, attentive to the, you're like an artisan, but the list is very large of modern artists who have been very attentive to the process, to the making, to the time, eventually to the tiredness of what it costs to be working and reworking. So I think it's, for me, I think she's absolutely part of a modern sculpture. The same for Ramkin Kabai. Even so, he looks so unmodern in the film, with the way he wants to be filmed by Ritwik Ghatak. I don't know if my answer was.
No, I was trying to take the time
Can't hear. Unless you have a mic, we can't hear you.
I think I could speak loud enough without the mic, but I was just trying to ask you, Patrick, whether you would see something about the fact that the word could be primitive or archaic, or these definitions are not good, but for whatever their word, that is an impulse in the modern. That's because in a sense Picasso returned to it and that returned to it. But that is a different modernism altogether, as you clearly said. It's a different time. So I just wondered if there is a connection for you.
I didn't hear well what is the last sentence? I didn't understand and didn't hear well. I heard Picasso, but I'm not sure I understood well.
Whether there was a connection in your mind between the primitive and the archaic, the returning to the primitive and imbibing that view. This is my belief that there's a lot in the modern that goes back to that. And both Ram Kinkerbad and Mira went back to that tradition.
And it's a long story because, again, it's one thing to, of course she was aware Adivasi was another tradition than her cultural tradition. It's clear, she knew she was dealing with another cultural tradition, another kind of aesthetical practice. Of course she knew what she was doing. And after that, I don't know if she thought that it was a kind of a echoing or similar to what Picasso had done with primitive sculpture. I know Picasso is also a very complicated story because people are speaking a lot about African art, but Picasso saw African art much after seeing archaical Spanish in Barcelona. When he went to the Catalan Museum, he saw first archaical sculptures after he saw the African object in Paris at his dealer's place and so on and so forth. So it's a very complicated story. But I don't think that she needed to identify to Picasso. I think that, in India, and after I would discuss after it's very personal and we enter into a very complicated, close to ethical, philosophical and ethical discussion. I would understand that you say that an Adivasi subject is belonging to another tradition, eventually another culture. I'm not sure I would say is a primitive, and not primitive because of I'm not politically correct, so it's not, but because I don't know. It's reminding me a sentence by Pierre Classe. He was a very, very not famous. He died too young, but amazing anthropologist from the 60s and 70s. Very engaged, very radical, and he was working with Indian communities in the Andes, the mountains. And he was saying, because people what are you doing with these people? They are living in like prehistorical times. And he was saying, I don't know any human being living in the past. So I think, of course, it's a very interesting question. How do you interact? How do you engage with subjects which are in the same iket nunc you are, knowing that you might have different cultural tradition?
Thanks for a very refreshing lecture on just new thoughts to us about how to look at the modernism. Definitely wonderful. Thanks for that. I just want to add a little idea of the politics in it. Right now in the present, we have a very stupid comment in the center, and the Minister of Culture, who is right now Mr. Mahesh Sharma, he said that modernism is a contamination in the Indian culture. So to talk about the modernism basically is a part of resistance program right now here for all of us. So definitely there are many reasons to talk about, which you have wonderfully explained in your lecture. But for us to talk about modernism all the time is definitely a kind of a politically motivated idea of resistance. Thanks for that.
Well, in the current context in Europe, expressionism, romanticism, classicism, or any other ism which has come to stay, say in 21st century in Europe. Leave aside the old concepts, 200 years ago and 300 years ago, when Picasso did, when Leonardo da Vinci did. You can see something on those art forms, but which according to you is the most prominent art form prevailing in the current European context?
So it's another, it's another difficult question because, you know.
One word you can say.
No, I can't answer in one word. It would be dishonest. It would be very clever, probably, but dishonest. If, you know, when you look at Europe, Europe is very small compared to China or India, but nevertheless, very complex, even confused these days. Many different traditions and different practices. And I would say that if there's, I won't speak in terms of style or I won't speak in terms of movement anymore. And maybe, but this is very personal, you know, because I've been in not in the business, but in the field for a long time now. And I would say that for me, the red line is between the artists who are still experimenting, who are still trying to articulate an aesthetical practice under certain conditions. They are able to identify, they are able to eventually to change, and artists who are sometimes with a lot of virtuosity and talent, just collaborating to the a certain kind of cultural decor. So this is where I would put the red line these days, you know, whatever the medium is, because what is probably still very obvious, and for the best and for the worst sometimes, is the extreme or heterogeneity of the, not even the medium, you know. And I remember a friend of mine, art critic Denis Sakaropoulos, and he was saying in the 80s, it's very difficult sometimes to imagine the number of gestures, ideas, which are in an artwork. So, you know, it's probably the legacy from the late 50s on, because we always speak about it. It's really probably the late 50s where a certain number of artists are really not coming back. You never come back to Leonardo da Vinci, but really reopening the field of aesthetical practice to anthropology, to linguistics, to performance, etc., etc. And when, to a certain extent, the Beaux-Arts, you know, the fine art category, is durably deconstructed. I'm not saying destroy, no, destruction as always a kind of a violence, and you can deconstruct smoothly, rarely, but you can deconstruct with a minimum serenity. And there is a deconstructive project. I don't think that there is any interesting project in the destruction. That's maybe because I'm older, you know, maybe I wouldn't have said that when I was younger, but it's what I see in contemporary art practices, and I would say not only in Europe. Even so, Europe is, you are absolutely right, not at its best at the moment.
So I had more of a comment really, because, you know, just like in the Euro-American trajectory of art history, there is now an impulse towards looking at widening the canon and looking at networks, precisely because there are these kind of erasures in writings of history. We see a similar kind of an impulse today in India, because we've got scholars from all over India now rethinking the canon, because if we think of the Tagore family, you know, they are members of the landed gentry, and they have an entire support structure and system in terms of literary production that's happening around them, art criticism that's happening around them, etc. But what has happened to the 19th century production of a time when art practice is becoming secularized, it is entering into the space of the exhibition, or the circulatory space of the exhibition, and you have these kind of comparative models, because if the works are being hung next to each other, so there's art criticism that's now being produced this work hasn't been archived because we didn't have, the kind of museums that started collecting from that point, or even private collectors who were collecting as, on a regular kind of a basis, or systematic basis. So in some sense, I mean, to begin with the Tagore family, I think is a given because you have journals like Prabhasi, these are all, or you have Modern Review that's archiving and documenting their work. So I think we need to push this back a little bit to maybe the 1880s, 90s, because we do have names of artists. We've had biographies written on them. There's very little evidence of the work they produced because it wasn't systematically collected. But just the fact that there was the sense that there was this kind of an artistic alienation from society. There was this kind of modernist notion of separating from bourgeois society. That we see in a lot of regional writing, for instance.
But I mean, it's, I completely accept that you can go even before the Bengal. With the Bengal school, sometimes we are dealing with 2 or 3 generations of artists, so we have to be careful. I would say the beginning of Joazanko and after Shantiniketan. And I won't have so much problem going back, but in that case, we have really to discuss the notion of the consciousness of that you are transforming a model. And I'm afraid that if you go back to the what you call the early Bengal oil paintings or the Dutch Bengal paintings, in that case, I find it's absolutely fascinating the way a certain kind of imagery is reinvented, reconducted, etc. But I'm not completely sure that there is something of a very conscious project of transforming an image. So
I'm thinking primarily of landscape painting, but there was a lot of that happening in the late 19th century.
that's probably, but absolutely. But what is also probably very important is to consider all what is called popular prints, the Calicut and even before. So of course, and after the question if, and it's also very important because not all geocultural areas, it's not always articulated in the same way. So in that case, it's more the aesthetical practices who was commissioning, what kind of people were producing, who was seeing what, and it's of course you have to enter in and during an exhibition. Of course, I would invite and I would include a certain number of what is called popular and so on and so forth. But there is a moment we have to when I spoke about this obvious, emancipatory, spiritual, and aesthetical project, it's something which is really, to a certain extent, announced by the artist. And of course, if you look one by one, you might see one more emancipatory, one more spiritual, one more interested in the aesthetical and the form, transformation of the forms. But nevertheless, the 3 elements are always there together in there.
Yes, one last question.
Catherine, you did an exhibition of Indian modernism at the Pompidou. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I did, and really, I mean, when I was selecting the artist, you or Pablo told me it's very bizarre. Nobody would do that. You put people who are never together. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, you were part of it. I can mention all the artists because 8 artists. I hope my neurons are still functioning. So you were in the exhibition, and Pablo Bartolomeo, and Serge Shah, Sosa Joseph, Gori Gil, Gautam Ghosh, Benita Persiyal, and I'm afraid I forgot one. Well, forgot it. And doing that, I was very, very, for me it was absolutely, if not obvious, there was a logic to the development of the project because it seemed to me that 2 generations and maybe close to 3 now of artists who were using a very different medium were, and I will speak here, it's very simplified, but in a way, both faithful and able to reconduct. Reconduct doesn't mean replicate, but to reconduct a certain idea, vision, practice of an inclusive and secular India. And I think it's something which was absolutely clear when you would look at all the artists together. And what was really interesting is that when the exhibition was on, somebody came to me and said, but you are very politically correct because you have most of the different regions and religions of India, as if it were written here. I'm not, maybe if you are very, very religious, you come to me, I will identify, but apart from that, it's really not at all, I'm not able to do that. So, but I would say reconducting the modern and in modern and modernist tradition, in that case. Your generation, inheriting the generation of your father, and it's modernist. If even so, I understand very well the question that modernism is becoming close to a dangerous word. But for me, modernism is it's very difficult to dissociate, except in case which are extremely complex and polemical, like Iraq. This notion that there is modernist architecture without a modernity in the political system and society. But if you could say from a few other countries, I'm afraid. But in your case, I would say it's you are inheriting a very strong modernist practice and time, and able to reconduct. Nobody was building sculpture of Nehru, absolutely not, in the exhibition. So I don't know if I answered well. Maybe if there is something I didn't.
No, hold
No,
on.
it was just interesting
आपका आएगा
to
ना
hear how
सामने
you,
बैठे हैं आप
how
कहाँ
you conceive putting, the 8 of us together.
But for me, it was functioning, and what I see these days is you are very. It's like gymnastic, when you want to run fast, you have to train, and you have so many reasons today to be really functioning with preconceived, framed, and this and that, and I think that with the passing of time, with very close and excellent friends working with me, I think that I learned to look at the works, and I don't mind if it's a photographer, if the person is also a botanist, or I really don't care. I'm just looking at the proposal, and I'm also very interested in not contextualizing, because it would be like forcing, but I'm very interested in the cohabitations which are sometimes revealing the antagonism, the frictions in cultural mapping, which could be much sweeter when you would put up the three, the top 10, and I think it's also and I didn't even intend, because I'm not interested in these kind of games, but of course for a certain number of people it was very surprising, because the idea they have of contemporary Indian art is absolutely filtered by a certain market, and it's a kind of top 20, you all know, I won't mention, and of course the reality of the practices is much richer than that.
It was a very visual show.
And it was, and you had a very, very strong wall, which is now, because this is, you are working, it's in the collection now. It's wonderful modernist wall, or memories of the modernist times.
Do you feel like taking another question? Hi, do you feel
Last
like taking
two
another question, Catherine?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
Still alive.
so this is perhaps widening the canvas of cultural mapping in a way, what I'm curious about. So your own trajectory, absolutely vast one, from 1997 Documenta, which for me was, and for many of us, was a sea change of the sea change moment. And then just a few pit stops and focus on a lot of what was happening in the Arab world. And this, have you inadvertently or consciously chanced upon any dots which join that you might care to talk about?
I didn't understand the last sentence.
Have you inadvertently or consciously come upon any dots which join within this vast trajectory? When I say dots that join, I'm talking about cultural mapping in a way. Because you were talking about the 10 from India, but then in the vast, much more vast canvas or landscape, what are the things which you may have come upon which are either surprising or not, but make you reflect and think about what are these things that perhaps join. I only call it, I can only name it dots that join, and I don't know how else to call it.
I think definitely you can identify in many different geocultural places artists who are working very precisely and who can be echoing to another artist working in a completely different political situation. I think you have now a certain, I would say, quality of the work. By quality, I mean not nice, or nice or not nice. Quality, I mean a certain tension between the idea and the resolution. I'm not even saying visual resolution, because sometimes, after Marcel Duchamp, if you're the one, the visual resolution is another story. And of course, you can. It's absolutely going further than any kind of a national dev. I think the national it's not so difficult when you are working and you are not completely stupid to overpass. But I think certain kind of market filtering strategies are more sournoise, perverse.
Yes.
Do you see technology affecting work? Because sometimes people who are not masters of their art also can produce wonderful work using technology. Does that affect thinking or presentation or the impact?
I mean, it's a massive question, and there are few possible answers. One being that I never thought that there was the medium is a medium. It's not an essence. So with any kind of medium, if you are working intelligently, it's not because you have a high tech that the work is uncontrolled. What I'm very, very cautious about is what I would call the techno-virtuosity, or the overuse of technology and this kind of a permanent entertaining, you are like in For the Throne, or like in what's that? Yeah, this kind of very massive, and this is not interesting. After, I saw amazing film. I heard somebody in the symposium the other day. I saw a wonderful film with a cell phone by Pedro Costa, the amazing Portuguese filmmaker, or Hassan Khan in Cairo under very different circumstances. It's not because the point is not the cell phone. The point is what they wanted to film, the way they filmed, the point is the way they edited, and the point is the way they circulated the film. So this is one, and after that, of course, we have to be, but it's so obvious sometimes, so massive. We have to be very careful with, again, this kind of aesthetization of technology, and this kind of idea that if it's technological, it's more modern, it's more attractive, it's better. We have to be, cautious. But you have a few very interesting techno works using very, very sophisticated technology. After that, we have to be, again, very cautious, because you have also completely sometimes ridiculous projects which are highly funded because it's helping to promote a certain kind of technology. But technology is a medium. So if an artist is able to deal and to use it intelligently, there is nothing against.
Well, friends, with this, the evening comes to an end, at least for this function. There's a later part of the evening which you can enjoy yourself. We are very grateful to David for having spent 1.5 hours talking about a subject about which he is so reticent. But anyway, we are grateful, and we are very grateful to you who have stayed on. Thank you very much.